Let's talk about Square Enix and the Final Fantasy rumor that we're going to be apparently seeing at E3 this year. And this is a pretty well corroborated rumor, but essentially, there's going to be a new action oriented Final Fantasy game called Final Fantasy Origin, and it's going to appear at E3. And it's a collaboration between Team Ninja and Square Enix, and it's going to be set at place in the Final Fantasy 1 world, or it's going to be a remake of Final Fantasy 1. I've seen both, but it seems we're not too sure whether it's a remake of one with an action combat system or if it's just taking place in the world of Final Fantasy 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the original article that reported on this and got this ball rolling, and that was from Fanbyte with Imran Khan. Now, if you don't know who Imran Khan is, he's very well established as a credible journalist. He's been in the business a very long time. He was a senior news director at Game Informer, and he's been in a variety of different places now. So a lot of people really trust his reporting on this. And after he reported on this, there were some other places such as Eurogamer that actually corroborated what he was saying. So we're going to go through this article and just kind of hit the main key points here, and then we'll discuss it. So it's titled Rumor, Square Enix set to announce a new action RPG Final Fantasy spinoff. The game will be set in the world of the first Final Fantasy. So the article goes on to say, over the weekend, a number of rumors have swirled about possible E3 announcements, as traditionally happens in the weeks leading up to the industry's trade show. In particular, a rumor seemed to swirl around two websites, Reddit and Gaming Forum Reset Era, about a new Final Fantasy spinoff that Square Enix is announcing this year. Now, we'll hold right here and just say, hey, yeah, this first appeared on Reddit and Reset Era, but then Imran Khan went out and verified this with people that he knows that works at Team Ninja and Square Enix. So the article goes on to say, the rumor states that Square Enix is working with Team Ninja, Koei Tecmo's in-house development team behind games like Ninja Gaiden and Nioh, and perhaps most relevantly, the latest entry in the Final Fantasy fighting game series, the Cydia NT. The posted rumors go on further by assigning the game a genre, something akin to Nioh or the Souls games, and suggesting it takes place somewhere in or adjacent to the world of the first Final Fantasy game on the NES. Now, this is very, very important to point out that Koei Tecmo is already working with Square Enix. They've worked with them in the past on the Cydia NT game, and I believe they also were working with them on the Opera Omnia game on the cell phone. So they already have a working relationship. And again, this has been independently verified with Eurogamer contacting their sources, Fanbyte contacting their sources, and I've even seen people like Jason Schreier commenting on this as well. So let's keep going. It says, again, he says right here, our sources have corroborated this rumor and suggest the name of the game is Final Fantasy Origin, not to be confused with the PS1 remaster or remake of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on the PlayStation. So the article goes on to say the game, which appears to be exclusive to PlayStation 5 with a PC release further down the road, will be one of Square Enix's tentpoles at their upcoming E3 show. For whatever reason, several large chunks of the undated June show have leaked out, including the Final Fantasy Origins logo and demo plans. Square Enix hopes to release an alpha demo this summer, not unlike Nioh's public alphas, to solicit feedback from the audience while the game is still in a fairly early state. This demo, like several other major demos, has its own title of Stranger in Paradise. Okay, so I'm going to stop reading here and just kind of reiterate. So this game is supposed to be exclusive to the PlayStation 5, but it's going to have a PC release later down the road, and it's going to be called, like we already established, Final Fantasy Origin, but it's going to have a demo that's released after E3 or during E3 that's called Strangers in Paradise. And this is similar to Team Ninja's treatment with the two Nioh games, which also had alpha demos that were sent out, and then people got feedback or they sent the developer feedback and they're able to improve on the game. And both of those games reviewed very, very well. All right, so the article goes on to say, expect the title to play similar to Nioh or other games in the genre, but to be more accessible for a wider audience. I'm going to stop right here and just point out, okay, I think this is key. Nioh games are very Dark Souls, so a lot of people that like Dark Souls combat enjoy those games, but that's not going to appeal to everybody. So it appears here that Square Enix wants the game to have good combat, but they don't want it to be too Dark Souls. They want it to be a little bit more accessible, which I think is a good idea. So let's keep going. It says Fanbyte sources indicate that the game is largely developed by the same team behind Dissidia NT, but that Team Ninja's nearly 200-person studio involves a lot of shifting around and that there aren't hard borders in the different teams these days. The Nioh DNA is in the game, likely the result of people core to the first two games' development being involved in Final Fantasy Origin. So we'll stop right there and just say basically what they're saying here is look, Koei Tecmo, or excuse me, Team Ninja is a subsidiary or a team that works with Koei Tecmo. And basically, hey, these people all work at the same company. It's kind of like at Square Enix, where you have these different divisions, and sometimes people will move between teams. So a lot of the people that worked on Dissidia NT are also assisting with this project. However, it appears that we're going to have, core people that were involved in the making of Nioh guiding this to make sure that the action combat is up to par. It's worth mentioning that anything could change before the final show, especially as more things leak out in the weeks ahead of E3. So this should not be misconstrued as a guarantee that the game will appear there. But still,
Don't get mad at me if it's not there, right? That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Covering all his bases.
Yeah, but still, production and marketing appear to be gearing up for full swing on the title soon, so it should not be too long until we hear about it. So that's the article. Like you said, he's kind of gave himself a way out, but this was also independently corroborated by Eurogamer, and then IGN and several other places picked it up and reported on it. And it seems like all the stories are fairly consistent that, yeah, Team Ninja's working with them. And basically, Square was interested in their experience with Nioh, which is a Dark Souls type game. Very well received, both of those games, 9s and 10s. And so they like the combat. They want something that's a little bit more accessible. Whereas, that Souls formula is not the most accessible, but they want their experience, and they're going to be creating an action RPG set in Final Fantasy I's world. So with that said, what do you think about an idea of like a Souls-light Final Fantasy I remake or kind of made in the Final Fantasy I world? What do you think about a Souls-light Final Fantasy or Dark Souls Final Fantasy?
I think I'd like it if it's a spin-off game, right? Maybe featuring a character that exists in the Final Fantasy I world and you want to like expand on that.
Yeah.
If it's supposed to be a remake of the original game but with like an action combat system instead,
You won't like that?
not the biggest fan, because I think like at party, like the party
Yeah.
dynamic is like key to Final Fantasy, especially those earlier ones. Like Final Fantasy 16, you want to make like maybe we don't know yet, but maybe just like a single character action combat system. It's like okay, it's a new game, right? But
It's a little bit more
if
forgivable.
yeah, if you're intending to like remake the original game and you're going to follow the same plot, but you're just going to be the warrior of light instead of the four warriors of light who all have a different job class that you can uh, choose at the beginning and then upgrade and buy equipment for and learn new abilities and stuff. It's different. Like right, you're going to change the experience so much that I don't want that kind of remake of the game. So, but for that reason, I would be fine with a like a spin-off of a different character who exists in that world,
Like
going on his own adventure. Yeah.
the pirate
So,
that says ARG.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you. I mostly agree with you that look, if you're gonna it depends on what they're doing. If they're remaking Final Fantasy I have said in the past, so I'm gonna be consistent, that I've always thought that if you were going to remake a Final Fantasy and make it an open world game, now the Neo series are not open world games, they're mission based, more
Mhm.
linear levels. But I'm just talking like what I've expected in the past. If they were to make an open world game with the Final Fantasy story, I think that would work really well. And I like, I could get down on that. And I
Mhm.
still maintain that with this game, that I think it could work. However, there's not a lot to Final Fantasy and for you to claim you're remaking Final Fantasy if you don't have the Light Warriors, like
Yeah.
it's not a remake.
Yeah.
That's
That's
like
kind of the that's like one of the defining features.
that's like with E feature.
Yeah.
you know? So if it's not party based, which the Neo games are not really party based, I don't have a ton of experience with them, but from what I saw, you might have like somebody that joins you in combat or whatever, but it's not job classes or anything like that. It's not like you have in Final Fantasy 1. So I think that, obviously we haven't seen it, but if it's exactly like the Neo series, then I would not I would find this remake appalling, you know,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
just it's not a remake, and I would be horrified that it was going to be really successful, and then Square would be like, "Oh, let's just keep doing
Remake
this, all of
remake
them,"
all of them. Yeah, like an action game.
and
Yeah.
it'll be like a whole series, and it's just like, "No,
No.
no," and then you get the Final Fantasy like 6, and you only have one character, right? Instead of like this whole band of characters. It just no. I'm not a fan of that. Now, if this
Yeah,
is a like you said, like an adjacent to the original Final Fantasy 1, it's a separate game that's gonna do its own thing. I think that that would be definitely more interesting to kind of explore. And I find the choice of this world to be interesting because I mean it was definitely a iconic game on the NES, but there's not, maybe it's because there's not a lot of lore there for them to jack up, and there's a lot more, you know, stuff they can expand upon to make it interesting. But I mostly agree with you that I'd be okay if it was a side game, but not if it was a main game. Now, what I will say, the Neo series, like those are JRPGs. If you go check them out, it's got like a quirky JRPG sense of humor that you will not find in Western RPGs. And so it's kind of got this nice blend between serious and humor that I find just refreshing. And so I think that definitely kind of gave me a little bit of relief that, okay, this might be something that I want to play. But again, no Warriors of Light, not a remake.
exactly. Yeah. Like you can use things from the world of Final Fantasy 1. Like you can have the action hero like fight the four fiends, right? And make those like really awesome boss fights and stuff. But don't try to contextualize the story as if it is like a retelling of the original game. Like just because then us old school RPG vets will not accept it because we'll be like, well, we see what you're trying to do. You're trying to tell the same story, but in a way that's acceptable, I guess, like for the modern audience, right? Or maybe they coin it as like accessible, right, for the modern audience. But that's we'll just be playing it and like this feels wrong. This is not this is not Final Fantasy 1, you know. It's
Right.
too different.
Right. I agree.
So that's why, yeah, I'd be more excited if it was a spin-off title rather than a remake or a remaster or whatever, however they want to coin like a retelling of the
Well,
original.
yeah. And the other thing I want to know is, okay, this is a collaboration between Team Ninja and Square Enix. So is Team Ninja or Koei Tecmo just making the entire game and Square Enix is footing the bill? Or is there some Final Fantasy blood, like creators that are involved in this too? Are we going to find out that Nomura's
Involved.
also a co-director or something,
Hmm.
because like, what is the credibility that this is a Final Fantasy game? You know,
Well,
are they just
the
making like a Neo game and they're going to slap Final Fantasy on it and they'll throw a chocobo in there? I mean, that might be okay, but who is working on this from Square Enix?
right. Well, the last game they made was Dissidia NT, which you know people
Well,
have
they made
had a lot
Opera
of gripe.
Omnia, right? Too.
Oh,
Yeah.
did they?
Yeah, they made Opera Omnia on the phone,
Oh,
which
I
was well
see.
received.
Okay, maybe that's why they're getting another getting another chance. No, I Dissidia NT was a good arcade game from what I understand, but the console port is what disappointed most people.
Yeah.
But Kazushige Nojima was involved, like he was a writer or credited at least as a writer, and he's a
It's not as
Square
refreshing
Enix.
these days.
Yeah,
I
but
think
true. But he is kind of like he's a Square Enix employee
right.
essentially,
He
not a Team Ninja employee. So I
Nojima
think you
Nojima,
might,
if he was involved, that would be enough for me to be like, okay, it's literally a Final Fantasy game.
yeah, yeah. So maybe something like that. Like
Yeah.
maybe he'll be involved in this one as well. He was involved with their previous game.
I anticipate if we find out like Nomura or somebody like that's involved, like that heavily involved, then this is not going to turn out well because like Square has a history of working with third party developers and then just pulling the plug. Like there was
Mm,
a sequel to Final Fantasy 12 called Fortress for the PlayStation 3, and Square literally ran this company out of business because they wouldn't pay them because they weren't happy with what they were producing. And
yeah.
they did interviews. There was interviews with like the team that made this, and they literally said the argument was over. Square kept saying the artwork did not look like a Final Fantasy game, and it was like they were like, no matter what we sent Square, they would say it didn't look like a Final Fantasy game. And so to test them, they literally sent them artwork from Final Fantasy 12, and they said it didn't look like a Final Fantasy game. And like like this is how strict Square was, right? And they kept like Square was not paying the bill, and they kept thinking it's Square Enix. Like, so they kept like charging like payroll to the credit card and stuff. And eventually Square was like, no, you didn't perform. We're not paying. And like this whole company went out of business. And so that happened. We have what happened with CyberConnect 2 with Final
Yep.
Fantasy 7 Remake, right? Where like Nomura and Katase were like, this looks like garbage. We'll make it ourselves. So I'll be interested to see, if I mean, but Team Ninja is pretty well established. I would imagine like they're not. That's the selling point of the game that
Yeah.
they're making it. So I can't. I don't know. There's still that possibility lingering in my mind.
Yeah. I wonder how far along this game is because Team Ninja, although I guess like the guy mentioned in the article, it's a large group of people and their responsibilities kind of shift. But they released an update for Dissidia NT, like the last one.
Hmm.
I think it was pretty late. I mean, okay, so it was February 18th of 2020. Okay, so I guess it's been more than a year since they like ceased updating their previous game.
Yeah.
So they could have gotten started on this game before that, and then so they might have 2 years or so of development like
Well, and
already finished.
this is the thing, though. I think like you're kind of pointing in the direction of sometimes with these leaks, very rarely is the leak 100% accurate.
Hmm.
It's reported out there and people's imagination starts running wild, and then it ends up being like 80% accurate. So in this case, maybe Team Ninja is working on a game with Square Enix, and it is going to be taking place in Final Fantasy 1, but maybe it's not like this massive AAA game.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a cell phone game. you know? And maybe it's, that's why it's more accessible. And so, it's not going to be this AAA game because Square's already working on so many AAA games right now. They got Final Fantasy 16, they got 7 Remake Part 2. I'm
Hmm.
assuming we got Project Athea or whatever the hell
Right.
Tabata's old studio's working on. I'm assuming Kingdom Hearts is at some stage of development the next game because that was a big hit. We have Dragon Quest, that's being worked on,
It's a
which
lot. Yeah.
which is a
Where
lot. So
how much is left in the budget for this game, right?
yeah, now you have this game with Team Ninja, which they're not going to be cheap to hire, and so I just wonder, what do we not know? But they did say they're going to offer like an alpha demo after E3 for people to play. I mean, apparently it's a PS5 exclusive, so I don't know who's going to review it because not. I mean, there are people with PS5s,
Eric,
but
Eric has one, right?
yeah, Eric has one, so he
He's got to
can.
get in on that.
Yeah, he can play it, and then he'll have to tell you all what he thinks about it. But I mean, I just think that maybe we're not getting the full picture, you know?
That's highly probable, I would say,
Yeah.
that
Well,
we don't know all the details. Yeah.
yeah. And the thing is too, I didn't realize, but Koei Tecmo were heavily involved with Fire Emblem Three Houses because of their
Yes.
experience with large maps and strategy. And they actually
Hmm.
did a lot of the social elements and the story writing as well. So, I mean, I don't think the rumor would be this far off, but I mean, give me another Final Fantasy Tactics, you know? Like,
Oh,
how
that would
would
be
be
great.
that would be tremendous, you know?
Yeah. That doesn't
Mm.
sound very like Dark Souls, though, right?
Yeah, the whole point of this is that they're bringing in their experience with action combat, so that
Yeah.
kinda nips that in the butt, but we'll put that in the very unlikely, but I would be very happy. But The only other thing I want to bring up here, and I'm curious what you think, is if this is true, completely like the way they say it is, I kind of feel like the Final Fantasy brand is just getting like too thin with the amount of different types of projects that are out there. Because I talk to people that that have only played like 7 Remake. They'll be like, well, I like that game, but I'm kind of like, I don't know where else to go with the
Mm,
game because I don't know where to start. And I try to talk to people and it's just very confusing because 7 Remake is this thing. Final Fantasy 15 is an open world game. Final Fantasy 13 is very linear. Then you have like these, the SNES era and like the PlayStation era. And then you have online games. And then you have like Final Fantasy, the freaking, what was the name of that game that came out on PSP? That Tabata was, I can't remember the name of it now. Type
Crisis
Zero,
Core, right?
Type
Oh,
Zero.
Type Zero. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
Type Zero, which is a dramatically different type of game. It's rated M. Final Fantasy 16 is obviously a different game. You got Chocobo Dungeon and stuff like that. You have Crystal Chronicles, which is a different type of game. And
Yeah.
now you're going to add to the pot like a Dark Souls Final Fantasy game. And it's kind of like at the point where like, okay, I see what you're doing here. You're just making games and putting Final Fantasy on the name, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much I think it goes back several years, but I remember there was like a leaked PowerPoint slide where they were like talking to their investors about like their strategy, and it that at the top of one of their slides was like exploit the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest franchises. And they like used the word exploit. Like they weren't shy about it.
They're like,
They
this is the most accurate word to describe what we're doing.
yes. Yeah. And so I mean the reason the reason Final Fantasy 11 and 14 are MMOs is because EverQuest right before and then World of Warcraft were really
Yep.
popular and made a
Yep.
ton of money.
Yeah.
And the reason Final Fantasy 15 became an open world game was because open world games were very popular and sold very well in the West. And the reason 16 is going to be an action game and the reason 7 Remake incorporated action elements, right, rather than being a turn-based remake of the game is because action games sell better in the West to the general gaming audience, right? The hardcore JRPG players, they'll buy your turn-based remake, right? But they want more. They want more than that.
Well,
So
why can't they just make a new IP? You know?
because they still want the hardcore Final Fantasy game people to buy it as well.
But it's not a freaking Final Fantasy game.
Yeah,
But we'll
it's kind
buy
of
it.
losing its
All they have
meaning,
to do
right?
is show a freaking chocobo and I'll buy it. You know?
Yeah.
It's just
Yep.
I don't know. It's just crazy because like CD Project Red, okay, they did the Witcher series, but it's not like Cyberpunk is like Witcher 2077.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, this takes place like 5,000 years after Witcher 3, and it's just like got no connection to the past at all. But
Mhm.
so it's just, I don't understand it. I think that like they're only harming themselves to do this, but it's, like if
They
they're doing something,
they
but they can't crack that 10 million. And I think it's because like it's intimidating to the larger audience, you know, because I
yeah.
know so many people that will like, that played one Final Fantasy and they're like, oh, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And
It is I know what you mean because in the past they didn't do this, right? They had a game called Final Fantasy and then they said, "Well, we also want to make an action RPG." Right? And so they called it uh Secret of Mana, right? Or Legend of Mana, right? And it
perfect.
was its
Yeah.
own game.
Yeah.
And
Classic today, by the way.
yeah, and so they had other franchises that if you liked those aspects, right, you could go to that franchise for those things, for those different gameplay or story elements or whatever. Final Fantasy Tactics, I think, was the first one where they started like wanting to have their cake and eat it too, right? They're
But that
like,
kind
we
of
want
worked because that was an RPG. Like like they tried to implement things that were in the other Final Fantasy games. But
yes,
I do
but
see your point. It could have been
there
something
was
else.
yeah, there was a lot of people who played Final Fantasy 7 as their first one and then played 8 probably, right? And then maybe picked up Final Fantasy Tactics and said, well, what the hell is this? You know, like it's just not anything like the other two.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah. That's a good point. They've been doing this a long time. And but
hmm
it's only gotten worse. You
it
know,
has.
I
Yeah,
mean, well, I don't know. Did it get worse? We had well,
it feels like it because they're now chasing the popular trend and then just slapping Final Fantasy on the title,
but I'm
right?
thinking
Like,
like we had Chocobo Dungeon, right?
yeah, true.
Which is pretty bad in terms of like capital, but I mean it's called Chocobo Dungeon. It's not called Final Fantasy. So it's
Yeah,
kind of like its own thing. Anyways, I think this is a mistake to not make it its own IP, but I am willing to see what they do with it. And maybe it's going to be, they said they're going to make it more accessible. So maybe there'll be a good attempt to make this feel like a Final Fantasy game rather than Neo with a Final Fantasy title,
yeah.
you know?
We'll see. I guess their presentation is on Sunday the 13th, right? So if it's we would expect it to show up there, although like the guy said, maybe not. It might not be revealed there. But he said probably going to be an alpha in the summer. So he would expect that's why they're expecting it to be revealed soon.
Yeah, it seems pretty likely to me that we'll see something there called this, and I fully expect that because it's been independently verified by multiple people. So if it's not there, I'll be surprised. And
Mm.
but I'm sure the game exists, and it'll just come out at a later time. So we'll have to see. Anything else you want to talk about with the Dark Souls Final Fantasy?
No, not really until we know more.
Yeah,
We've
yeah,
done about as much speculating as we can.
yeah. I wonder if Dark Souls is frustrating in its own right because it's just constant repeating boss battles. But the original Final Fantasy game was also frustrating because there was a lack of auto target, right?
Yeah.
So like it would just attack air if you didn't guess how much HP was left.
And
So
they
I wonder which one would be more frustrating to play, like blind, like you've never played either one before, you know?
right. In the original Final Fantasy, they get back when the games came with instruction manuals and like supplementary material with the game.
Yeah,
Like you had a world map on one side,
yeah,
and then on the other side they had a bestiary with all the enemies and how much HP they had.
yeah.
And so they wanted you to like fight the battle and then like find the enemy
Hmm.
on the list and be like, okay, he's got 300 HP. My warrior of light,
Does
my warrior
60
can
damage. Yeah,
yeah, and my fire spell will do this much, you know, and kind of plan the battles out that way. But now
yeah.
that's very tedious. Like nobody has time to do that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like Google every enemy. I'm just gonna kind of like hope this works out.
Yeah.
So, so yeah. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And also, check out our audio version. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and practically any podcatcher you can think of. Also, we have a fantastic media partner at rpgfan.com. Be sure to go check them out for your latest RPG reviews and news, as well as some other kick-ass podcasts with Rhythm Encounter, Retro Encounter, and Random Encounter. Go check them out. We'll see you next time.